I spent 22 days in a cardiac unit fighting to keep my heart beating right, and not one person who shares my last name walked through that door. Not my husband. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. I want you to actually sit with that number. Because I sat with it for 22 days straight, staring at the same water spot on the ceiling tile above my bed. And it never stopped feeling impossible. 22 days. That's over 500 hours of IV poles and monitors that beeped every time my heart rhythm did something it shouldn't. Of nurses checking on me at 2 in the morning, because nobody else was going to. My name is Patricia. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my life I thought I understood exactly where I stood with my family. It turns out I had no idea. It took a hospital bed to teach me, and what I learned cost me more than I ever expected, and gave me back more than I thought I had left to gain. It started on a Sunday afternoon in March, the kind of gray Ohio day where the sky just sits low and flat over everything. I was in my kitchen, peeling potatoes for a dinner nobody was going to show up for, when my chest seized up like someone had reached in and grabbed my heart with a fist. I don't remember falling. I remember the linoleum against my cheek and thinking, very calmly, that I should probably call someone. And then not being able to make my arm move toward the phone on the counter. My neighbor Donna found me 20 minutes later, because she'd noticed my dog barking at the back door for too long. She's the one who called 911. She's the one who rode in the ambulance with me, holding my hand, a woman I'd known for 6 years through nothing more than borrowed sugar and waving from our driveways, while my actual family didn't even know I was unconscious on my kitchen floor. I called my husband from the ER once they got my heart rhythm stable enough to let me use a phone. Wesley, that's his name, has been my husband for 26 years. I remember my voice shaking so hard the nurse had to hold the phone steady for me. Wes, I had some kind of cardiac event, they're admitting me. It's serious. There was a pause on his end and then he said, oh no, that's awful, Pat. Keep me posted, okay? I've got the Hendersons coming over for poker tonight. I can't really cancel on short notice. And he hung up. Keep me posted. Like I was giving him a weather update instead of telling him his wife had just had a heart attack. I called my son next. Bradley is 31, works in commercial real estate, lives 40 minutes away. He picked up soap on the fourth ring and I could hear a television going behind him. I told him what happened. He said, geez, Mom, that's rough. Let me know how it goes, yeah? And then, before he even hung up properly, I heard him ask someone in the background, did you grab the wings or do I need to swing by the store? I didn't bother calling my daughter-in-law Sandra. She and I hadn't spoken in almost a month. Not since our last conversation had ended with her telling me I was being dramatic. For pointing out that she and Bradley had borrowed $3,000 from me the previous year, and never once brought up paying any of it back. I texted her instead. 4 words. Had a heart attack. Hospitalized. She left me on red for 9 hours. The first surgery, the angioplasty, is mostly fog in my memory now, just cold rooms and masked faces and the particular fear of not knowing if you'll wake up. What I remember with painful clarity is coming out of recovery, disoriented, my mouth dry as paper, and turning my head toward the door of my hospital room, actually hoping, that someone would be sitting there. The chair was empty. It stayed empty for 22 days. I want to be fair, because fairness matters even to people who've stopped earning it. Wesley did text, sporadically, how you feeling? On day 2. Hope the doctors are taking good care of you. On day 8, with a thumbs up emoji, as if I had a head cold and not a heart that had stopped pumping properly. Bradley sent exactly 3 texts over those 22 days. The third one asked if I still had the key to his storage unit. Sandra sent nothing at all, not a single word, until day 15, when she texted to ask if I knew where she'd left her grandmother's gravy boat the last time she'd been at my house. I lay in that bed and watched the woman in the room next to mine have visitors every single day. Her grandchildren brought her get-well cards they'd made with crayons. And the nurses had taped so many to her wall, it looked like a quilt. The man 2 doors down had a rotation of old army buddies, who'd sit with him for hours, playing cards on a little tray table, filling his room with laughter that drifted down the hallway and into mine. I had a nurse named Audrey who started bringing me extra Jell-O cups on her break because, she said, somebody's got to fuss over you a little, sweetheart. A woman who'd known me 4 days cared more about whether I made it through the night than the 2 people who'd shared my home for decades. I cried more in that hospital from being alone than I ever did from the pain of the surgery. And there's something about that particular kind of crying. The kind that comes from loneliness instead of injury. That rearranges something permanent in you. It teaches you exactly where you rank, cell by cell, and once you've learned that lesson, there's no unlearning it. You can only decide what you're going to do with what you now know. They discharged me on a Tuesday. Nobody came to pick me up. I called a cab with hands that still shook from the medication, because my body hadn't fully remembered how to be strong yet. And I went home to a house that felt like it belonged to someone else. The mail had piled up against the front door like a paper drift. My ficus had dropped every leaf it owned. I sat down on my own living room floor that first night, too tired to even climb the stairs to my bedroom, and I made myself a promise. I promised I would stop confusing obligation with love. I promised I would stop sticking people who shared my address for people who actually cared whether I lived or died. And I promised that the next time my family needed something from me, I would finally let myself say no. I didn't have to wait long to test that promise. Exactly 3 weeks after I came home, I'd counted. Because by then I was counting everything. The way you count evidence for a case you didn't know you were building. My phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. Not "How's your recovery going?" Not "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Just this: "Hey Pat, so exciting news. Bradley and Sandra found their dream house, the one on Maple Crest they've been eyeing. They're a little short on the down payment. Looking at $14,000 to close the gap. Family helps family, right? Let us know what you can do." I read it 3 times. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, the kind of laugh that has no humor anywhere inside it, just disbelief looking for somewhere to go. $14,000. For a house. From the son who'd asked about chicken wings while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery. And the husband who'd had a poker game to attend. I want to tell you a little about Wesley and Bradley. Because the context matters here. Wesley and I built a life that looked fine from the outside for 26 years. But somewhere in there, I'd become the household's quiet infrastructure, not its partner. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday, who packed for every trip, who handled every doctor's appointment for both of us, who absorbed every emergency so smoothly that everyone around me forgot emergencies required absorbing at all. Bradley grew up watching that. He grew up watching his father treat my needs as background noise, and somewhere along the way he learned to do the exact same thing, except worse. Because at least Wesley occasionally noticed me when it was convenient. I used to tell myself I was imagining the imbalance. People do that. They convince themselves the worst version of their own life can't possibly be the true one. But 22 days in a cardiac unit with an empty visitor's chair has a way of stripping out every bit of doubt you'd been holding on to for protection. Wesley's text just sat there glowing on my screen. This perfect, awful artifact of everything that had gone quietly wrong in my marriage and my family for years. Nobody had called to ask how my heart was healing. Nobody had asked if I was scared, if I was in pain, if I needed help carrying groceries because my chest still pulled tight every time I lifted something heavier than a coffee mug. They reached out because they needed something. Because that's what I had become to them. Not a wife, not a mother, an account they could draw from. I thought about ignoring the text entirely. I thought about writing back a furious, detailed accounting of every missed day, every hollow text, every chicken wing question, asked while I lay on an operating table. I drafted that message in my head a dozen times and never typed a word of it, because I realized something. They didn't deserve my explanation. They didn't even deserve the kind of anger that takes effort to construct. They deserved exactly the level of effort they had given me, no more. So I opened my banking app. I sent $1 to Wesley's account, the joint account I still technically shared with him, and in the memo line I typed 2 words, "Good luck." Then I turned my phone face down on the nightstand, and slept better that night than I had in over a month. I want you to picture the storm that broke loose the next morning. Because I certainly did, lying there with my coffee, smiling at the ceiling like I'd won something. And my imagination wasn't far off. My phone lit up with 14 missed calls from Wesley, 6 furious texts from Bradley, a man who'd sent exactly 3 messages during my entire hospitalization, suddenly finding the energy to type in full, righteous paragraphs. And then, finally, a message from Sandra, The first words she'd sent me in over a month that weren't about a gravy boat. Are you serious right now? $1? Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Bradley's mortified. The seller's agent is asking questions about our financing now. This is supposed to be the happiest time of our lives and you're making it about you. Making it about me. I sat with that phrase for a long time. As if surviving a heart attack alone. As if grieving the absence of every single person who was supposed to show up for me. As if 22 days of silence in that hospital room had all been some kind of performance staged specifically to ruin their closing date. I didn't answer any of them that day. I let the messages stack up the way my mail had stacked up while I was hospitalized, untouched, accumulating, turning into their own kind of evidence. It was Wesley who finally called on an actual phone line instead of texting. 2 days later. I almost didn't pick up. Some small, foolish, hopeful part of me that apparently hadn't finished learning its lesson made me answer anyway. Pat, he said, his voice doing that tight, reasonable-sounding thing it does when he's furious but trying not to show it. What in the world was that about? Bradley's humiliated. The seller might back out. That's an interesting thing to be worried about, I said. He just wants this house, Pat. Is that so terrible? It's a big step for them. And something cracked open in me. Something that had stayed sealed shut for 22 days of swallowed silence. Wes, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. I had a heart attack 5 weeks ago. Did you know I coded for almost 90 seconds during the second procedure? Did you know that? Silence on the line. No, he admitted. I didn't realize it was that close. You didn't realize because you never asked. Not you, not Bradley, not Sandra. I was alone in that hospital for 22 days. 22. I watched the woman next door get visited by her grandchildren every single afternoon. I had a nurse bring me Jell-O because she felt sorry that nobody else came. And now, 5 weeks after I came home to a dead plant and a pile of mail, and a recovery I had to manage completely on my own, the first thing any of you reach out about is $14,000. That's not fair, Pat. We were all just busy. It's a stressful time for everyone. Busy, I repeated. For 22 days, all 3 of you, busy. He didn't have an answer for that because there isn't one. There's no version of busy that explains a family failing to show up for someone fighting for her life. Not when that same family found plenty of time for poker nights and house showings, and gravy boat retrieval in that exact same stretch of weeks. So that dollar, I continued, was me telling you exactly how much I have left to give to people who showed me, as clearly as anyone ever has, exactly how much they have to give me. You want $14,000 from someone you couldn't be bothered to call more than 3 times in 3 weeks? I gave you my answer. I hung up before he could respond. It didn't feel like anger. It felt like setting down something I'd been hauling around far longer than just those 22 days. But the story doesn't end there. Because 2 weeks later, I learned something that rearranged everything I thought. I understood about that month. I was at my sister Eileen's house for a small Sunday dinner. Eileen being one of the only people who'd actually come to see me in the hospital. Twice, with a Tupperware of her chicken and rice soup, and a stack of paperback mysteries, because she remembered I liked them. She mentioned something almost in passing, the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows. I'm just so relieved you're doing better, she said. We were all worried sick when Wesley told everyone you didn't want company while you recovered. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. What? Eileen's face shifted as she realized she'd said something I clearly hadn't known. Wesley told the whole family you specifically asked for privacy. That visitor stressed you out, that you wanted to be left alone to focus on healing. He made it sound like you'd basically asked everyone to stay away. I sat there at my sister's kitchen table, feeling something cold spread through my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. Because I had never said that. Not once. In fact, I remembered with painful specificity, telling Wesley multiple times in those first few days exactly how badly I wanted someone, anyone sitting in that chair beside me. Wesley hadn't just failed to show up. He had built an entire story to excuse his absence, and worse, to make my isolation look like my own preference, my own coldness, instead of his and Bradley's abandonment. He had taken my pain and repackaged it as something I'd chosen. Probably so nobody in the extended family would start asking uncomfortable questions about where he'd actually been. I felt sick, and then, underneath the sickness, something sharper and clearer started forming. I asked Eileen if she'd be willing to show me what else had been said about me during those weeks. In the family group text I'd been quietly dropped from years ago after a disagreement over a Thanksgiving seating chart. She hesitated, but eventually pulled it up and handed me her phone. What I read explained everything. There were messages from Wesley throughout my hospitalization, casually updating everyone that I was doing fine, resting up, needed her space. There was an exchange between him and his sister, dated during my second week in the hospital, the week I'd had a dangerous arrhythmia that had the cardiologist using words like concerning and monitoring closely, where Wesley wrote that he was slammed with work and the house stuff with Bradley, and couldn't make it down to visit that weekend. Slammed with house stuff, while I lay in a hospital bed with a heart that kept misbehaving and nobody beside me. There was no mention anywhere of how serious it actually was, no fear, no urgency, just a quiet, convenient smoothing over, so nobody would think to show up and complicate the story he was telling. I sat in my car outside Eileen's house for almost 20 minutes after I left, just breathing, recalibrating everything I thought I understood about that month. I had assumed my family's absence was ordinary negligence, the everyday selfishness of busy, imperfect people. This was different. This was a choice, dressed up and disguised, specifically built, so I'd carry the abandonment alone and silently, without even the dignity of anyone else, knowing the truth of what had happened to me. That's when I decided $1 wasn't enough, not because I wanted revenge for its own sake, but because I refused to be the only person who knew what had really happened. I didn't make a scene. I didn't post some dramatic announcement tagging everyone I'd ever met. What I did was quieter, and far more effective. I asked Eileen to add me back into the family group text, just long enough to say one thing. When she did, I posted a single message, time-stamped and undeniable. A photo of my hospital discharge paperwork showing the admission date, the surgery dates, the length of my stay, alongside one line. For anyone who was told I didn't want visitors, that wasn't true. I asked for someone to be there with me every single day I was in that hospital. I just never got it. I think people deserve to know that before this family spends another dollar, pretending everything is fine. Then I left the group chat immediately, before anyone could respond, because I didn't need to watch the reaction. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere outside my own head. The fallout, which I heard about secondhand from Eileen, was significant. Wesley's sister, the same one he'd told about being slammed with house stuff, called him directly asking what exactly was going on. Other relatives who'd quietly wondered why nobody mentioned visiting me, suddenly had their answer, and it wasn't flattering to anyone but me. Wesley tried, predictably, to claim I was confused, that the medication messed with my memory of what I'd actually said. But discharge paperwork doesn't get confused. Dates don't change because somebody finds them inconvenient. The truth had teeth now, and it didn't need his permission to use them. As for the house, I heard through Eileen, since I'd made it clear I wasn't interested in direct contact with Wesley or Bradley anymore, that the deal on Maple Crest fell through entirely. No $14,000 from me. And apparently the relatives who'd been quietly approached for smaller contributions suddenly developed a newfound reluctance once the full picture became clear. Bradley and Sandra ended up renting instead, somewhere considerably more modest. I didn't do any of it to sabotage their house hunt. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I refused to be a woman who swallows cruelty quietly, just to keep someone else's comfortable story intact. If the truth made things harder for them, that wasn't my doing. That was simply the natural cost of a lie that had finally been dragged into daylight. It's been several months now. I haven't spoken to Wesley, Bradley or Sandra since that message in the group chat. No grand reconciliation. No tearful phone call that suddenly makes sense of any of it. Just silence. The same silence they gave me for 22 days, except now it's a silence I chose, and there's a strange, steady peace in that. I filed for divorce 6 weeks ago. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Renata, who didn't waste a single sentence on small talk, told me Ohio's laws would work in my favor given how long we'd been married, and how much of our shared finances I'd quietly managed for years without credit. I'm keeping the house. I'm keeping my retirement accounts untouched by anyone else's down payment. What I have instead now is Eileen, who shows up, who still brings soup even when nobody's sick, just because. I have Marcus, a man I met at cardiac rehab of all places, who once drove an hour through sleet just to sit with me during a follow-up appointment because, as he put it, that's just what you do for someone you care about. I have a small circle of people now who understand that showing up isn't optional, isn't something reserved for when there's a house to buy or a favor to extract. I think about that empty chair beside my hospital bed sometimes. 22 days of it sitting there untouched, a quiet, specific monument to exactly where I ranked. I don't carry the same grief about it anymore, though. I think about it now as the moment I finally understood the difference between the people who share your blood or your name, and the people who actually show up. So here's what I keep asking myself, because I think about it more than I probably should. If the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally only come around when they need something from you, do you think $1 and 2 words was too harsh? Or was it exactly the answer they'd earned?